Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are in a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Arn. And of course, we couldn't do the show without the founder of the Four Horsemen, the Hall of Famer himself, Double A, the enforcer, Arn Anderson. Arn, how are you, man?
I'm just glad to be figured in.
Man, I am too, and we hope that you guys are figuring us in as a weekly download. We appreciate all of your support. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, leave us a 5-star review if you think we've earned it, and tell a friend about your new favorite wrestling podcast. It's all things Arn Anderson. Last week we did a hashtag Ask Arn Anything. This week we're back with a little more modern WWE. We'll be covering Over the Limit 2010, and I've enjoyed visiting the most recent WWE stuff. This one went down on May 23rd, Joe Louis Arena, Detroit, Michigan, 11,000 fans here, roughly a $675,000 gate, 197,000 buys on pay-per-view. Over the Limit, man. I think they only had 3 of these, 10, 11, and 12. At some point, Arn, do all of these shows just run together? I mean, the pace you guys used to keep when you were with WWE was unbelievable. It starts to run together at some point. It has to, right?
Well, yeah. And I'm not sure exactly of the period and what years it was, but I mean, it was building towards having 2 pay-per-views, one from each brand every month at one point. And you can only imagine how difficult it is to shoot an angle, build an angle, and blow an angle off all in 3 weeks just to get ready for 2 weeks later having another pay-per-view. I tell you, it was a grind, and it took a lot of hard work and a lot of creative thought to try to make all these things different, especially when you had some matches that were 3 pay-per-views in a row. It was, return matches.
This is coming off of the Extreme Rules show where we saw John Cena beat Batista in a last man standing match, which we've recently covered in the archives. What an ingenious finish that was that you came up with there for John to retain the title. We also saw Edge beat Chris Jericho in a cage. Sheamus beat Triple H in a street fight, and Jack Swagger would retain the world title by beating Randy Orton. We should mention in early May, after going head to head with Raw for a few months, TNA decides to put Impact back on Thursdays. What do you remember about TNA trying to recreate the Monday Night Wars with WWE here in 2010?
Well, they had a good talent roster, and they were going to make a run at it. And, I think probably it was a good idea to not necessarily have to go head to head. I think, the wrestling fans have been there, done that. I'm not sure at that particular time going head to head was good for either company. I think it was a wise choice, but they had some talent. And, if you know what you're talking about in this industry, you want every company that's out there to do well, because it's a funny thing. The other companies bleed off of that. When business is up, it's notoriously up for everybody. It's just good for the business in general.
No doubt about it. We know that, this Monday night experiment doesn't exactly work out for Impact. And if you want to know more about that, listen to 83 Weeks. We recently covered that with Eric Bischoff. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on with Jim Ross. Meltzer would report Jim Ross's contract expired, and he's at this point still with the company. He's going to be used in a number of roles, all off the air at this point, including continuing to do talent payroll and helping with talent recruiting and development, as well as talent relations. He's also going to work on outside projects with Barry Bloom, like writing a book. Although as a WWE employee, it will be interesting. By not being under contract as talent, there will be different restrictions, but WWE has a lot of restrictions on what employees can do as well. Not being under contract would mean that they can get rid of him at any time and he can leave at any time. So the idea of going to TNA or HDNet isn't dead, although my feeling is TNA probably isn't happening and HDNet has a lot better chance of happening. Of course, in this era, HDNet was showing a lot of other wrestling, including Ring of Honor. We know eventually that station would change to become Access, and Access had things like Impact and New Japan, and we know that he's going to do a lot of business for New Japan at some point. What do you think about Jim Ross coming off air? I mean, most agrees maybe the greatest wrestling announcer of all time. And it seems like WWE wants to move in another direction, and it doesn't feel like Jim is ready for that. What do you think of this decision?
Well, you're never ready for that, especially if you're still performing at a very high level. JR is very loyal employee, very loyal to WWE. And it's one of those situations where, okay, you work here, but you're not on TV doing what you do. You've been, any way you slice it or dice it, if they, found him 3 or 4 different jobs, it's still reducing his value. I'm sure when he looked at it, he felt like he was in a reduced capacity. But JR, like I said, he's loyal. He would have did whatever they asked him to do to the best of his ability, but he's an announcer. He's an incredible color commentator, and to put him in any other role is just wasting him.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that anybody wouldn't want him behind the mic. In his new book, Under the Black Hat, which is available at jrsbbq.com, he details a lot of this, including, basically how the company over the years, most would agree, mistreated him. What do you think of the way it felt like, as an outsider, Vince occasionally used JR as a bit of a public punching bag? Would you agree with that?
Imagine that. Kick the most loyal, in the nuts. It just seems like, sometimes, and it happens in every occupation out there, the most loyal employees, the ones that work the hardest and try the best to be a model employee, it seems like squeaky wheel always gets the grease. These guys get abused and used, and the guys that give them all the shit are the ones that get the grease. So I think this is just another huge case of that.
Yeah, it's a shame to, you feel bad for JR reading the book, but it's still one of the best books ever written about wrestling. Pick up your copy. jrsbbq.com is where you can get an autographed version of that book. Let's talk about Bret Hart. Dave would write, as things are scheduled, Bret Hart's farewell to this WWE tour will be on the May 17th Raw in Toronto. Hart was on the Fight Show and said, as far as he knows, that's his last show, but he's open to do more if requested. Hart told WWE he's going to be based in Calgary for most of the next 2 years, and if they have something for him, he's open to do anything. His girlfriend is going to college in Calgary, and when she finishes, he's going to be spending more time at his home in Kona, Hawaii. But 2 years from now, who knows what will happen? This is something a lot of wrestling fans never thought would happen, that you would see Bret Hart come back to the company. Of course, I think it happened in January of this year. I mean, he was such a big part of their history for such a long time. It's kind of cool to see those fences mended. I mean, you've just talked about maybe the crueler side of WWE, but this is the side that, we don't often hear about, where, hey, cooler heads prevail and we get the band back together. Were you surprised that happened with Bret Hart and WWE?
Not sure if surprised is the right word. I say never. And let me be clear. It's a tough business. You better have a thick skin if you're going to be in this business. You're going to get fired sometimes when you don't deserve it. You're going to get cussed out when you don't deserve it. You're going to get not used when you don't deserve it. There's all kind of things. And it's just like any other industry. It's a tough business. It really is. Let me just say this. Just one time, I would love to be able to say, okay, I'm going to go to Kona, Hawaii and lay on the beach. I'll see you in a couple of years. He's my hero. That's my God. That's tremendous. And, he earned it. And I'm glad they mended the fences. If, Bret still had things he wanted to do in the business, and basically just this business gets in your blood, and it's a wonderful way to make a living. It's a wonderful way just to live life, and to be able to, come back and get your face on TV and feel that emotion from the fans is when you've worked as hard and as long as Bret Hart has for that company, he deserved it. He earned it.
Let's talk about Tony Atlas. He makes the news here in early May. Meltzer would write, Tony Atlas, 56, was fired this past week. They hadn't done anything with him since the end of ECW. And once they broke him and Mark Henry up, his days were numbered. Abraham Washington and Atlas had just resurfaced doing wraparound segments on 24/7. This run with Tony Atlas here is almost like the forgotten run. I think most fans remember Tony Atlas from way back when. What was it like, hanging around Tony Atlas in 2010? This is a change of pace, huh?
Yeah. Well, Tony, Tony's always a happy guy. He's always laughing, always smiling, go with the flow. They did some Johnny Carson bits, right? Him and Abraham.
Yeah. Some funny ha-has. Yeah.
Yeah. A few ha-ha shows and all that. And when it ran its course, I don't know exactly what happened, if creative just ran out of, things for him to do, but Tony had a good career, and I think he'll probably tell you, no regrets. He would come back for a lot of Legends things, and basically he's stayed in the business all these years, whether it be conventions or whatever. And so, I was around Tony. I never saw him in a bad mood. I never saw him have a crossword with anybody. He was just always laughing and smiling.
Yeah, I think that's the experience everybody has with Tony. Carlito on the other way, well, maybe not so much. Carlito makes the news here. Meltzer would write, Carlos Colon Jr., 32, was released on May 21st. He had not failed a drug test, but arrived in Toronto on the 17th in no condition to perform. He was in denial that there was any kind of issue, and he was ordered to go to rehab and still refused by the end of the week, and thus was fired. He's asked for his release so many times in recent years and hadn't been happy for the most part. Whenever he would ask for those releases, he would be told they're going to do something with him, but of course it never materialized. He got in the doghouse before the 2007 WrestleMania when his scheduled match with Ric Flair was taken off the show, and he went to South America and was vocal about Flair, more about Flair being taken off the show than himself, but he still wound up in the doghouse. So two issues here to unpack. We'll start with the second one first. Do you remember his match with Flair being taken off the 07 WrestleMania card and Carlito raising a stink? Allegedly, not on his own behalf, but because Ric Flair wasn't on WrestleMania?
I don't. That's, that's one that has escaped my memory. I have no recollection of that. And I believe if I would have had a match with Ric Flair on WrestleMania, I would have done everything I possibly could to have made that as good as I could. So that's, I wished I did remember the circumstances around that.
Let's talk about his release itself. I mean, this is a very talented young guy, 32 years old. He's been with the company at this point for a handful of years. And I mean, right away he was programmed with Carlito and with John Cena rather, and doing big stuff at WrestleMania with Roddy Piper and Stone Cold. And then for whatever reason, it just doesn't click again. Is this more of him not fitting in with the culture of WWE than anything else?
I know that I had his first match on the main roster with Cena, and I think he beat Cena his first match.
Yes, he did.
Which is about as big a launch at that point in time as you could possibly have. I don't think it could have been any bigger. Any number of things could have went south as far as creative to Carlito, who knows? But I do know this. I don't want to be anywhere that I'm not wanted.
Right.
And another talent, if they keep expressing to you they don't want to be there, why not just do the right thing for the company and for the talent and just release them? Let them go. It would, because it's never going to get better and it's never going to be a success story. I think once you tell a company you don't want to be there and then you do it twice and three times, believe them. And it, don't hurt the company by taking up a spot with a guy that doesn't want to be there, because he's not going to give you his best because his mind is not in it. I know Carlito was a creative talent. He had an incredible look, and that hairdo was worth the price of admission, and the spit in the apple, the whole thing. He had a good gimmick. And he was a good hand. Really was very entertaining, but I just say if they don't want to be there, let them go. Life's too short.
Yeah, I would agree. Let's talk about something else that's happening at the time, which is making the headlines. Meltzer would say that Jerry Lawler is starting his own promotion in Memphis called Jerry Lawler's Memphis Wrestling. He's got TV again on Saturday mornings. It's going to be at 11 a.m. on Channel 50. It's set to debut in June. And this is the premier time slot from wrestling in the 70s and 80s when Memphis wrestling was super, super hot. What do you think about, this feels like, I don't even know. Like, this is sort of throwback and retro before it was cool. Jerry Lawler starting a Memphis wrestling promotion in 2010. They're doing TV tapings in a small building. Coco Beware, Brian Christopher, Derek King are the biggest names there besides Lawler. His son, Kevin Lawler, also involved. And the idea is to run shows in the area and have some sort of loose affiliation with WWE. Have you ever thought about putting throwing your hat in the wrestling promoter ring?
Hell no.
Why not?
Are you kidding me?
Well, if Jerry Lawler can do it, why can't Arn Anderson do it?
Because he's a lot smarter than I am. I'm a wrestler. That's what I do. That's what I want to do. That's who I am. I tell you what floors me, to be honest with you, because I don't remember anything occurring to where WWE worked with Jerry in that show. No transfer of talent, no talent coming from WWE to being on that show or that show to WWE. And that's what it means to me if they're going to have a working relationship.
Right.
Talent swap. Jerry Lawler is a smart man. And in Memphis, he could probably get anything done. I think the thing that, from a selfish perspective, the thing it means to me is it's one more place at a time where there were no places for young talent to get experience, to get TV time, to get seasoning. Because in 2010, there was only, two places to work.
Yeah. You could say Impact, Ring of Honor, and WWE, but there aren't any sort of, high profile indies beyond Ring of Honor, if you could even consider them that in 2010. So another spot is always good for guys to sort of hone their craft.
Yes, it is. And that's the main thing. If you don't have new talent coming up all the time and re-energizing the business, going to burn out, because anything and anybody gets old. It's just human nature.
Well, that's unfortunate, but it is sort of the name of the game. Let's talk about some other news and notes before we jump into the pay-per-view. Meltzer would make note of the McMahon owned stock. He says Shane McMahon still owns 675,249 shares of WWE stock, which at the time was worth 10.8 million. And he has another 631,761 shares, about 10.1 million, earmarked towards him in a 2004 trust set up by Vince McMahon. Vince owns in this era 4.5 million shares, which are worth $720 million. Did you ever get in on the WWE stock along the way?
I didn't. should have. In the back of my mind, I did not want to be tied up in some capacity to where if they chose to get rid of me or I chose to leave, that would be something that I would have to go through a bunch of effort to get a hold of, or possibly lose, or any number of things that may or may not have been possible from a negative standpoint. I just didn't want to take that chance. I guess that's it. It was just like doom and gloom, fear of the gloomy. If they can me or I decide to quit, how am I going to get that stock out of there and go with it right away without something happening? And maybe it wasn't possible that something would have happened to it, but who knows?
Let me ask, did you hear sort of nightmare stories of some of your other brothers on the road maybe deciding to go their own way and WWE holding them up about the stock, or that was just, your line of thinking?
Yeah, it might have just been an ignorant line of thought for me. I'm not, like you say, I'm not a computer guy. That's why I have a money manager. He takes care of my investments because I'm not capable. And I kind of had a separate deal on the side. I had a money manager, I had my own retirement and all those things put in place. So there was just something about the stock. I don't know. I just didn't know enough about it to get heavily involved in it, which maybe I should have. There was probably a chance to make a lot of money at different times over 18 years.
One of the other things I wanted to bring up that you brought up there is, hey, in case they got rid of me or I decided I wanted to do something else through the years, did you come close to saying, okay, that's enough and throwing your hands up and walking away?
Not really, because it was just so much security for my family,
Sure.
and the benefits for the company, if you're an employee, are fantastic. And if you're a wrestler for the company, independent contractor, you make a shit pot of money. So it was never that it was about the money or any of those things, but from the last 5 years I was there, which I've stated before, up until the time that we parted ways, I would just feel my worth depleting. I felt like I was viewed in a less than way. So, I didn't think, well, I'm just going to quit, because that's not who I am. And my family comes first, and they will always come first. And let's face it, I didn't know where I would go or what I would do, but I knew I would do something. Little did I know Conrad Thompson was laying in the weeds, or I might have said some bad words and took a powder.
Oh my gosh. I love you for that.
That's the absolute truth. And, I figured out after I was gone, I still had value, and my name had value, and my reputation had value. And good friend of mine, Tony Hunter, started booking me on some appearances and stuff and Comic-Cons and all that. And because I'd never done any of that my entire career. It was like t-shirts. I'd never had a t-shirt. And all these things started coming together as being successful. And I figured out, hey, there is life after WWE. Thank God.
Yes, there is. And your quality of life is probably through the roof compared to some of those late night drives in the middle of the night to get to the next town and figure out how to get your reports uploaded and have to go to meetings. And I mean, it's a different lifestyle right now, right?
It's the happiest I've ever been. And I actually have spent more time with my family than I have in years. Be it that we're stuck in here in the house together, that's fine. Everybody's got a bedroom and everybody's got a TV. As long as I keep the 2 refrigerators stocked, they're happy. So, yeah, life is good. in a weird way, this has been a blessing for our family.
Well, I think that's well said. Let's get to the pay-per-view. We would see in the pre-show MVP get a win over Chavo Guerrero in 6 minutes and 14 seconds with the Playmaker. The first match on the card is for the Intercontinental title. Very recently on SmackDown, we saw Kofi Kingston win the Intercontinental Championship, but outstruts the chosen one, Drew McIntyre, to present a handwritten note, or maybe not handwritten, but a note from Vince McMahon saying, hey, I'm reinstating Drew McIntyre. He's going to retain the Intercontinental Championship. So it's back on the line here. Drew will be defending against Kofi Kingston. Teddy Long has, stripped him and fired him for repeatedly attacking Matt Hardy, and the chickens came to roost and Vince McMahon bailed him out. And here we are. They get 6 minutes and 25 seconds. Meltzer would say the match never got going. Kingston threw McIntyre's shoulder into the post, but then missed Trouble in Paradise. McIntyre went for the Future Shock DDT, but Kingston escaped and uses the SOS for the surprise win. Nobody was ready for the finish when it happened. Star and a quarter. I got to tell you, Arn, it was fun to go back and watch this because this is before New Day. This is when Kofi Kingston was from Ghana, and Drew McIntyre doesn't even look like Drew McIntyre now. But it was fun to see them battle for the Intercontinental title. I wish maybe they had a little more time. You saw it for the first time in 10 years. What did you think?
Well, I always liked Kofi, and I always thought he had a lot of potential, and he was just starting to blossom at this point. I believe this point in time is when Drew got so lean, right?
Yes.
He got so ripped, it looked peculiar. He got too ripped, if that's possible. And it was almost a distraction when you look at him now in that mature, big, rugged look that he has. He looked like a first stage bodybuilder that was ready for a show back then.
Yeah.
And I would tell him, Drew, you have gotten too lean. And he was trying to do what he thought Vince liked. And Vince is a body guy, as we know. But I think he took it too far, and he got so lean that it was a distraction, if that's possible. And I know that being the chosen one is just like anything else. When you get pushed too hard, and to put that moniker on somebody, that's pretty stout. That's a hard road to hold, even though we're working here, and it's a working moniker and the whole thing. I think in the back of his mind, Vince did go, hey, he's the next guy. And if that's the case, I see why he got so lean. But anyway, these guys would have had a pretty good match for the short time they had, I'm sure.
Let's also mention after the match, McIntyre says the pay-per-view is going to stop right now until Teddy Long comes out and reverses the decision and gives him back the title. Instead, Matt Hardy returns and lays out Drew with the twist of fate. Pretty nice reaction here for Matt Hardy, huh?
Yeah, and it's pretty good that something Teddy does sticks. Teddy Long is awesome, but bless his heart, he never had anything when he was in a position of power that stuck. So yeah, that was cool. It all worked from a story standpoint. I think that worked.
Let's talk about the next match. We're going to be talking about R-Truth and Ted Dibiase, but here's how we got here. On the April 5th Raw, Dibiase was given possession of the $1 million title and access to a trust fund by his father, of course, the $1 Million Man, Ted Dibiase. Ted Jr. then began looking for a Virgil, a manservant like his father used to have, and he offers the position to R-Truth, who refuses, and that leads to a feud between the two. After losing a match to John Morrison, Dibiase attacks him, prompting R-Truth to interfere and save Morrison. And here's our match. R-Truth and Ted Dibiase Jr. They get 7 minutes and 45 seconds. Meltzer would write, Matt Stryker's tidbit here was that Virgil was earning 3 times the money working for Dibiase as he did for working for his father. A few fans are trying to get the Virgil chant going, but it doesn't take. It's pretty hilarious when you think about the idea that the former Virgil, Mike Jones, is here in 2010. You got any good Mike Jones, Virgil stories you can share with us from back in the day?
Smallest head I ever saw.
Yeah.
Kurt Hennig and myself are walking down a hall, and Virgil is in front of us. And we're bullshitting. And Kurt looks up, and I looked up to see what he was looking at. And it's funny. It's like wrestlers can communicate with kayfabe language or just one word, and you know what the other guy's talking about. And he looked at him, and he looked at me, and he said, Beetlejuice.
Wow.
I had to sit down. I was laughing so hard. Absolutely hilarious. It fit because he was jacked and he had wide shoulders and he looked like there was just a walnut sitting up there. And it was hilarious.
It was hilarious to see him here. You know, he's gone on to become an internet legend. I think he's got a couple of friends of his who help him run his Twitter. And I mean, he has become a funny character online. R-Truth gets the win here. Well, it's a clean pin using the lie detector. Nice little story, nice little setup. What did you think of the actual match here between R-Truth and Ted Dibiase Jr.?
Well, I think Teddy got hurt. I think he got a concussion, which might have put a little bit of damper on the match. I don't remember the entire match, but the one thing that I would back up and say, and I'm being a historian, prior to this, Teddy was with Cody and Randy. Correct?
Yes.
And it's been a while back, but that thing was on fire. And before you can really comment on the match we're talking about today, you got to look at the fact that that was another one that got shot in the foot way too soon. And it was another one that I voiced my views on when they were talking about, I mean, they were just getting rolling as a unit. They looked incredible together. They worked incredible together. At that particular time, Randy was viewed as the veteran. They got the rub off of Randy, but they held their end up. Both of those kids did. And that thing should have went another year before you ever split anybody off from anybody, because once you split Cody and Teddy off from Randy, it became a little bit diluted. And then you turn those guys on each other, even more diluted. So what you got with this version of Ted Dibiase was a guy that was just getting kicked down the ladder at warp speed. And that's probably the view that the audience had, which made them getting invested in this angle whatsoever probably a tough chore.
Yeah, and you hate to see it because Ted had a great look. His work was good. And Meltzer would note, Ted Dibiase suffered a concussion early in the match with R-Truth, which hurt the match. An audible was called due to the injury, as the original plan was for Dibiase to blame Virgil for his loss and lay Virgil out with Dream Street, which would have sent Virgil on his way. He would also continue, WWE is very wary about the concussion issue for obvious reasons. Dibiase only did an interview segment and one move on Raw. He won't be allowed to wrestle until medically cleared. When do you remember concussion protocol, if that's even the right phrase, becoming a thing where you guys had to, obviously there was an evolution. I mean, back in your day, you would say things like, oh, I got my bell rung, and you'd be back at it the next day, or if not later the same day. But things started to change in the 2000s. When do you remember, or is there a match or a moment or a specific incident where it started to be handled much differently?
Well, who's the kid that is now in charge of all that? What's his name?
Chris Nowinski.
When Chris Nowinski got involved after he had, and he told me, I saw him backstage after he had to quit, and I saw him like, I want to say 2 years later or something, you know, and we were talking back in the hall, and he had gotten involved with concussions. And I said, you know, how you doing? You know, all that stuff. And what have you been doing? And, you know, since you've been gone, he said, Arn, he said, I had a headache for 1 year solid. And he wasn't making a joke. He wasn't trying to be funny. I believed him. And he said, I wanted to die so many times. It was like a migraine for a solid year. And I guess, you know, once he started to get better, it was almost like an epiphany, I guess. He wanted to call attention to, you know, all the concussions in the business and all the dangers and all that stuff. And once he got involved and it became like a real issue, that's when things started to change. When you say Teddy did one move on Raw, he wouldn't have done one move. He wouldn't have been able to do anything, even been out by the ring. Once things got in place and protocol got put in place as far as what you do post concussion. So once Nowinski got involved, and thank God, I'm glad that the talent is taken care of, everything changed.
And we're thankful that it did. I mean, obviously it's a different time, and I'm sure at first there's probably some old timers who maybe had some pushback about all this, but given what we know now, it's a much safer, much better business these days. Would you agree?
Hey, I'm not one of those hard asses that, go, shit, what a bunch of bullshit. They're making too much out of nothing. I had several concussions, and I'm glad the talent is taken care of. We didn't have any of that back then. We didn't have trainers. We didn't have doctors there. We didn't have anybody taking care of us. But that was the nature of the business. Right. It was not part of what we did, and kudos to WWE to putting that in place and taking care of the talent and looking at them, making sure that they're always okay. And when somebody says they're hurt, that's it. That's all they have to say. There's no argument about there, and they're not looked at in a different light or less than, they want to be conscientious for all that stuff. So, from my era to now, I'm very glad it's changed.
I'm sure you had your fair share of concussions. Do you remember which one was maybe the worst one or the most memorable one where you look back and say, God damn, it was never worse than that?
Yeah, probably the one I've talked about before when I was working for Continental, and Rick was there, and the top rope broke, and I did a flip and smacked my head on the concrete, and they took me to the hospital, and Rick, after his match, came to the hospital and stayed all night. And that was like a really major bonding. The world champion is going to come sit in the lobby and all night long at the hospital, waiting to see if I'm okay, and drove my car there and brought my bag in the room where I would have my wallet and all that stuff. He did all those things for me, but I was knocked completely cuckoo. When I woke up, I had no recollection of the top rope breaking, going splat on the floor, or any of those things. That was pretty much a bad one.
And that it really is the beginning of the trouble you had with your neck injury, right?
Not really that I can see. The first inkling of my neck injury was actually in 88 or 89 when I was wrestling for WWF and Marty Jannetty in a tag match. It was either in Boston or Madison Square Garden. We had a double shot, afternoon, evening show, and I don't remember which was which, but the afternoon show, we did a spot where those guys hit us with a victory roll, which is where you jump up. It's like a Frankensteiner.
Right.
Basically. And I just didn't get tucked. There's no blame, but Marty was with me, and I just didn't get my head tucked, and my head went right in the mat, and I just heard, and even though it's not loud in your mind and in your ears, it is real loud. And that was the first time. Now, I thought I just jammed my neck, because that's the way we would think back then. You never thought, oh shit, I just broke my neck.
Right.
You just didn't think in those terms because you didn't think your neck could be broke.
Right.
Thought you were indestructible. I had a big, thick neck back then. I went, shit, I'm just jammed my neck. But man, it's like just burning. It was like a pinched nerve. And I didn't know, but I cracked a vertebrae. So we got through the match. Thank God those guys did most of the match. I got there that night, worked another match, which I did less than I did that afternoon, thank God. Get back home a few days later. Now, managed to work through it, and that's where I went and got my first test. And they said, okay, you got a slight crack in whatever vertebrae it was. And I managed to hide it. I managed to rehab it and just get through it on my own, because you wasn't going to miss no days back then.
Yeah,
that's for sure. Not with that in that company, with things being red hot the way they were and the way we were positioned. I wasn't going to miss a single day of work. And so, believe it or not, after couple 3 weeks, it started to get better and better, and it just healed itself.
Thank God for that. let's talk about the next match. This is a main event anywhere in the world. It's Rey Mysterio and CM Punk. After a few months of feuding, Mysterio is going to challenge Punk to a straight edge society pledge versus hair match and Over the Limit. So the idea is, if Punk wins, Mysterio has to join his, I guess you would call it, cult, the straight edge society. And if Mysterio wins, Punk has to shave his head. On the May 14th episode, we would see Mysterio and Punk face each other in a singles match, but the straight edge society, who at this point consists of Luke Gallows, Serena, and a masked man, interfere and attack Mysterio. The next week, Mysterio interrupts an initiation ceremony in which Punk was shaving the heads of 3 men to induct them into the straight edge society, and mocks Punk, claiming everyone would be laughing at Punk when he was shaved bald at Over the Limit. Later that night, Mysterio would team with MVP to defeat Punk and Gallows, and that brings us to this match. And in this era, if the babyface wins on sort of the go-home edition of TV, it feels like it's not going his way at the pay-per-view, but that's not the case here. Mysterio gets a win over CM Punk in 13 minutes and 49 seconds. Teddy Long has banned the Straight Edge Society from ringside. There's blood early from Punk's right eye, which is probably from Mysterio's knee brace, or at least that's Meltzer's theory. And there's also another cut on the top of Punk's forehead, which he thinks maybe came from a Hurricane Rana into the barricade. So Punk winds up needing 13 staples to close the cut. And, Charles Robinson's trying to do whatever he can with a towel. Punk is visibly pissed at having the match stopped. Mysterio is going to try to keep selling. Eventually the boring chant gets pretty loud and Punk just runs from the people tending to his cut and goes wild on Mysterio. They go back and forth and the match gets going. Eventually he hits the 619. He misses the springboard splash. Punk's head is all bloody at this point, and Mysterio gets the win with a schoolboy. Meltzer would say, I thought the stoppage in the middle made this not reach the level of some of their other matches. They got 3.25 stars. Accidents happen here. And these are 2, main event, top level guys working in the middle of the card. And for this night, it just felt a little snake bit. What'd you think watching the match back?
Well, I'm sure of it. And I'm sure those guys were livid. But again, you're either on board with taking care of the talent or you're not. It's right. All or nothing. It can't be just in some cases. And when a guy's bleeding, match stops. That's the rules. And I know how the talent felt. I know how Punk felt. I know how Rey felt, because you lose your momentum. And, let's face it, your older fans are used to people bleeding and the match continues, and they don't understand that stopping it to get the blood stopped and all that. They just know that whatever momentum you had is now gone and you got to start over. And that's tough. And the main thing is what you ended up with in the saving grace. Thank God, since those things happened, it would have really been disastrous if Punk would have went over.
Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine the reaction from the audience? Rey Mysterio overcoming all the odds is always a good thing. And back then it was really a good thing because people love Rey. And Rey is tiny, but Rey has got guts and Rey has got tools and he's got good psychology. And when he shaved Punk's head, he didn't get all the hair. He just gapped the shit out of it, which is more insulting than anything. So the audience got a nice pop there, and Rey Mysterio won the day, and that's always a good thing.
The post-match, as you mentioned, we see a mystery man attack Mysterio. Gallows and Serena are following. They're going to pull out handcuffs, but then Kane makes the save, and Kane throws Gallows out of the ring, choke slams Punk, and then he beats Gallows to the back. Mysterio uses these handcuffs on CM Punk to handcuff him to the ropes, gives him a 619, and then they start cutting his hair. And to your point, they don't cut it all, but it's pretty great to see Punk try to sell it, and he's trying to cover up with a towel. And the newsletter would say Rey Mysterio will be taking a few weeks off on a vacation. In recent weeks, when there was talk of Mysterio having some financial issues, and we were told last week those issues are gone, the sides have come to an agreement which included Mysterio getting time off after this pay-per-view. He's been saying that his knee is not bothering him, but he's still in need of surgery and has been since last fall. At one point, there was talk of him getting surgery, and they even shot an angle to eliminate him. but he decided to avoid the reconstructive surgery because it would keep him out of Mania. And he felt like he'd missed enough Manias in recent years due to injuries. Originally, he was planning on getting the surgery after, but now he seems to be doing better. And you've known Rey for a long time. I mean, he was tearing things up, man, 15 years prior to this in WCW, but his knee problems, when they started, it felt like they never stopped, but he works a style where you almost can't help but have some knee injuries, right?
Yeah. And you have to work that style because that's what's expected.
Right.
You can't have a guy Rey's size out there manhandling people. It has to be that he's using his entire body to propel into his opponents to be able to pull off the offense that he pulls off. And you got to be able to pop up on that top rope and warp speed. You got to be able to slide in and out of that ring and warp speed and do all the things that Rey Mysterio does to keep that intact, that character. And, the thing about it is, though, you look at the other side, you know what a WrestleMania pays. And if you're in a slot, it pays damn good. I don't think anybody on that card is not happy with what they make, but there's a lot of money to be made at WrestleMania, and nobody wants to miss that, no matter what you have to do, if it's cover up an injury or whatever. And I'm sure if Rey, and he had, I think, missed a Mania or two, he didn't want to miss that one.
Let's talk about what I'm glad we're not missing. That's the Hart Dynasty taking on Chris Jericho and Miz. Let me give you the backstory here. The Miz's feud with the Hart Dynasty had begun while the Miz was still one half of the unified tag champs with Big Show. And during the draft episode of Raw, the Hart Dynasty defeat Miz and Big Show to win the championship, which leads to Big Show then turning on Miz. In the following week, Miz and Jericho, another former tag partner of Big Show, team up to attack the Hart Dynasty, and Jericho goes on to defeat Smith to earn a title match for himself and Miz. And that brings us to Over the Limit. So in this era, Davey Boy Jr., who, is working as David Hart Smith, is teaming with Tyson Kidd. And we've talked a lot on this show about how much we enjoyed the 2015 pairing of Tyson Kidd and Cesaro. Well, 5 years before, Tyson Kidd, still a tag team specialist. He's with David Hart Smith, the Hart Dynasty, and they're going to retain their tag titles over Jericho and Miz in 10 minutes and 43 seconds. Meltzer would say this was technically the best worked match of the undercard, but it was hard for them to get the crowd. The crowd loved Jericho, who got a huge babyface pop, probably because of the Canadian contingent. But since he worked as a heel, the crowd wasn't getting into his heel selling. But either way, though, he goes on, he being Meltzer, pronouns pal, to really put over what a special performer Tyson Kidd is here. The finish sees Smith pinning Miz after the heart attack finish. He gave it 3.25 stars. High praise from Dave Meltzer here. What'd you think?
I agree. I'm a huge fan of Davey Boy and TJ, and Jericho, I could see would be a baby face. So that just left Miz, and you can only beat Miz up so long, without the audience, wanting to see something else. It's a funny thing about Detroit, I guess, because it's right there on the Canadian border.
Right.
You had a lot of Canadian fans over the years, really big time. And they're great fans. They're a great audience. And if they're cheering for Jericho, that kind of took the edge off of the other guys, the other Canadians, Davey Boy and TJ. But those guys were just so creative and so different, and they were young and new and fresh. I just think it was over before it should have been.
Why don't you think Davey Boy Jr. had a bigger run here with the company? I mean, he's clearly on good enough terms with them. I mean, he even showed up at Hall of Fame a few years ago when the Hart Foundation went in. It just feels, I don't know, like a missed opportunity. He's got plenty of size. He's got the right pedigree. His work is good. Was he just too young at the time? What say you?
Yeah. And I will make a prediction. He'll have another run with WWE.
Yeah, I hope so. This match is really great, guys. I can't recommend it enough. It gets 3.25 stars, the exact same rating that we got with Mysterio and CM Punk. No surprise that those are going to be two of the best matches on the card. Next up, and this feels oddly familiar lately, it's Edge and Randy Orton. As a part of the 2010 draft on April 26, Edge goes to Raw. And later that night, Edge interferes in a match to determine the number one contender for the WWE title when he speared Randy Orton and cost him the match. The following week, Edge hosts his own talk show, which they're calling The Cutting Edge. He has Orton as a special guest. And of course, during the show, Edge is going to try to justify his actions by saying he was trying to make an impact and attempts to convince Orton to reform their old tag team Rated RKO. Orton ain't having it, and he attacks Edge. The following week, Orton would defeat Edge and Ted Dibiase in a handicap match, which then leads to a Pick Your Poison match on the May 17th Raw, where Edge and Orton pick each other's opponents for the night. Edge would have to face The Undertaker and loses intentionally by countout, while Orton faces Jack Swagger and loses by DQ when Edge interferes. And that brings us to this match. They go 12 minutes and 49 seconds. Orton gets a loud initial female shrieking pop when he comes out, but then it dies down. But it's so much so that even Lawler acknowledges it on commentary. Ultimately, Edge gets a double count out with Randy Orton in 12 minutes and 49 seconds. Meltzer would say, Orton then went to set up the RKO and started punching the mat. That's when his right shoulder got dislocated by punching the mat. Orton's arm was lifeless and he was pissed. Referee Jack Doan asked what was wrong. Then Orton went outside the ring and whispered to Edge what was wrong. Edge sets up Orton against the barricades, goes for the spear, but Orton moves. And at this point, both guys are counted out. It was a bad match, but understandable given the circumstances. Really unfortunate. I think they probably both had really high hopes for this, and it falls a little flat, but shit happens. But it feels like it's happening a whole lot during this show so far, Arn.
Yeah. And it's Murphy's Law. When it rains, it pours. And I remember that match and Randy popping his shoulder out. He had popped his shoulder out prior to that, and I'm not sure how many weeks. He just took a bump out over the top. And as he grabbed the top rope to go over, it jerked the shoulder out of place. He was working with Kane on a house show. I remember that. So he was really having some issues with that thing just popping out on just crazy times. And there's no way to judge that match or anything else knowing what happened. You just got to give them some credit for at least getting a finish in and be able to have some conclusion, even though it's a flat finish. Nobody's like kissing your sisters. Nobody's happy. But in the situation, if you've ever popped your shoulder out, you're not worried about if this makes sense from here on. Let's just get this over with and get to the back.
The next match is, a little disappointing. It's Big Show and Jack Swagger for the world title. Big Show wins by DQ, so the title doesn't change hands. They get 5 minutes and 3 seconds. Meltzer would say this was a bad match, but absolutely not understandable given the circumstances. Swagger did 2 Vader reverse splashes off the top rope. Show does the bench press kick out, sending Swagger flying out of the ring. And then Swagger just grabbed the belt and uses it for the DQ. He hits Big Show for a second belt shot, gets a dud rating in the Observer. In post-match, Swagger's going to bring a chair into the ring and hit Show with a couple of chair shots to the back. Show is going to reverse quickly and chokeslam Swagger. Then he hits Swagger with a chair shot to the back and then chokeslams him onto the chair and then leaves him laying with a knockout punch. It's, I don't know. I mean, I guess if this was a Raw match or a SmackDown match or something like that, maybe I can understand it, but doing this on a pay-per-view, I don't know. What say you?
Well, I'd have to go back and watch it, but I know that those two guys had the makings of having a good physical match. And, Big Show's a giant. Anything he does for a guy is a lot bigger than what a normal guy would do because he's a giant, for God's sakes. And it sounds like to me it got pretty heated on the end. Chair shots are always good for a violent crowd, and I would say that crowd in Detroit was a violent crowd. It's hard for me to sit here not having it right in front of me and being able to critique it that way, but I know Show has never went into a match that he didn't do everything he could to help the guy he was working with within reasons and stay in the giant in there. And maybe it was just because it was a DQ finish. Maybe the audience there were looking for a title switch. I don't know, or maybe Swagger had not got hot enough yet to where that translated to heat. Just not sure.
Next up, it's the Divas title. Eve Torres and Maurice. Maurice is going to lose, so Torres retains. 5 minutes and 2 seconds. It gets a quarter star, but Meltzer says it's not really their fault. They're coming off a bad match, and it's this late in the show. He would say it means these ladies had no chance. I don't know. This is before the more modern diva era or women's wrestling and WWE era, but these ladies are trying their best, and they're both talented performers. We know Maurice is now a big time TV star. Torres maybe a little before her time here. You watched it this week for the first time in 10 years. What'd you think?
Well, Eve had aptitude, she really did. Of course, her husband's an assassin. He's one of the Gracies, and, she could flat choke you out if she wanted to.
Sure.
But a sweetheart too, and wanted to learn the business, and was, I would see fit working with her. There was times on live events that I would try to work with her and show her some stuff, and she was so gracious and wanting to learn, and had she had more time and more reps, she would have gotten, I think, good, very good. And Maurice, great heel. People didn't like her. It's the French Canadian thing. It just comes out of her pores. I don't think that late in the show they would have had a chance. I'm not sure what the build, what that was getting to the match, how much story there was behind it, or if it was just a situation where we need to get the ladies on the show and we'll put them right here. Not sure.
Yeah, this is what I think Bruce has described over years as the let me up match. And any match that's going to be between a hot semi-main and the actual main event, it's going to be sort of the death spot. And it feels like the formula for years and years was, let's throw the ladies there. We don't want to hurt the guys' matches, but there was no issue apparently hurting the ladies' match. And that's the victim again here.
Well, I know before the ladies got so good, before they really started to become excellent wrestlers in that whole era, I mean, part of the thought process was you got two beautiful women there, and I mean that in a very positive way.
Sure.
Why wouldn't our audience want to see, which is typically male, two beautiful women? And that was part of the thought process at that time, because who knew it was going to explode into the girls being just world-class workers and all that stuff. This was pre that. So you can't go wrong having two beautiful athletic women go out and do their thing.
Let's get to our main event. This is a continuation of the great John Cena Batista feud. We've recently done the last man standing match. Well, we're looking for a new step, boys and girls. And this time it's an I Quit match. They get plenty of time, 20 minutes and 28 seconds. This is good stuff, man. Before the match gets started, Batista tells Cena he'd give him a chance to say, I quit, before the match gets started and he gets hurt. And this is great stuff. The finish is rather interesting. There's a couple of cars on the set here, and Cena is laying in front of the LED board behind the car, and Batista manages to get in the car. The keys are in it. He cranks it up, throws it in reverse, and backs into the LED board. And we are led to believe that John Cena has just been murdered live on pay-per-view. Now, if you're watching very closely, you can see Cena sneak over behind the lights and get out of harm's way, but Batista doesn't know that. And when he gets out of the car, well, Cena's got something ready for him. And, he tries the F5 on the car and he won't submit. And then he teases that he's going to F5 him off the top of the car onto the ramp, which is a very elevated height to say the least at this point. And Batista finally admits and says, I'll quit. And when he quits, you think, okay, well, Cena's going to let him down, but Cena, who's supposed to be our baby face, still throws him off anyway. And he goes through the stage. Quite the visual. It is a little bit of stunt work. I was a little disappointed in our hero, Arn. He did a bad thing. He threw Batista through the damn stage after he quit. The match was over.
That's the best thing he's ever done. Hey, let's freeze it right here. It's a FU, not an F5. That's Prox.
Yeah, my apologies.
Finish. You might want to go back and fix that.
No, I'm a dumbass. Let's let everybody know that I fucked it up. I said F5. It's definitely an FU. You know all about the FUs, and you probably had something to do with putting together this finish in the big stunt. What'd you think watching it back?
I thought it was violent as shit.
Yes, it was.
And once that picks up, Dave and John were two of the biggest stars in the company. And I think this was around the time that David it was hard to get heat on him because he was the face of SmackDown for a long time. He was the number one guy on SmackDown, I thought. And to get people to dislike him, and John's always going to have his detractors, I thought that John doing the FU off the top of the car was just something that he needed to do, and his audience needed to know that if you push him too far, John will go to some questionable lengths too. You can't punk a baby face out. They got to be able to fight. That's how they get over, and that's how they stay over. You may kick their ass, you may beat them, but you can't punk them out. And for John to do something a little questionable, I thought was good for his character. And, those guys put their body out there on the line, and we were able to do some pretty cool stunts, and it was a good hot finish. And they deserved, they being the audience, to get a finish. And when he said, "I quit," and he got it shoved up his ass anyway, that's about as good as you can do as far as a baby face paying off his promises.
Really good stuff here. Very entertaining, especially for the era. It gets 3.5 stars. Meltzer would say that there was a bunch of indie guys who were going to help catch Batista when he falls. We should also mention that after Cena gets the big win here, Sheamus comes out and hits him with a bicycle kick, or the brogue kick, as it were. This is not something that's super common in WWE pay-per-views, but it is something that I think consistently works, because you sometimes leave these shows, if it really is a blow off, and wonder, well, what's next for these guys? And we find out what's next for John Cena. It's Sheamus.
Why does it always have to the show end making them happy?
Right.
I agree with you 100%. You know the answer? You don't.
Right.
And in the old days, if you were building to the next show, and I don't mean just week to week, but if you were going to build from pay-per-view to pay-per-view, that could be 3 or 4 months out, sometimes you left the show. Even if you left it with a victory, you left that babyface laying in a pile of blood. And automatically, I want to see it again. I want to see it again. I am no longer satisfied. And leaving it with some heat, got to remember the previous pay-per-view, Sheamus had pretty much kicked the shit out of Triple H. That's not a bad setup for this match. And to bring him out here and get more heat, he was getting all the tools to get over, he being Sheamus.
Right. Well, we should mention, when it came to the Wrestling Observer reader poll, they gave this show, when it came to ranking the best match, John Cena and Batista get 47 votes. Rey Mysterio and CM Punk get 46 votes. The Hart Dynasty, Jericho and Miz get 10 votes. So it's neck and neck with Cena, Batista, Mysterio, CM Punk. I recommend them both. In fact, I recommend all three. I think these 3 matches really saved the show for me. The worst match poll, it's not even close. It's Big Show and Jack Swagger. Disappointingly though, the show overall gets 73.3% thumbs down, 16.2% thumbs in the middle, and 10.5% thumbs up. What do you think watching it back? Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in the middle?
I think they finished strong, which is the key.
Yep.
Probably started a little bit weak, but hey, I'll give it a 65% positive.
Yeah, I liked it too. There are some news and notes coming out of the show though that I do want to touch on, because this is going to be sort of a swan song of sorts for Batista for a little bit. Meltzer would write, the biggest departure, as has been talked about since WrestleMania, is Batista, whose contract expires at the end of this month. He'd originally agreed to work house shows until mid to late June and was advertised on a number of shows. The last word we were told is because he suffered a back and tailbone injury and taking the crash pad bump at the end of the pay-per-view, the decision was made to finish him up with an interview that aired on the April 24th Raw show. Even though he said he's leaving, nobody believes he won't be back. And for that matter, relatively soon, with most people figuring he'll ask to come back in 3 to 6 months. And if not, for sure in enough time for WrestleMania. The feeling is at his age, 41, he doesn't have a lot of big money years left. He's making big money. In recent years, I've heard he's earning between $2 and $3 million annually, and he's doing a lot of $50,000 weeks if it's a pay-per-view week. But he lives big, and there's no way for him to earn this kind of money elsewhere. He's telling people he's got a huge money offer for MMA, and he's going to be leaving for that sport, which has raised a lot of eyebrows given his age and that he has no formal competitive experience in any of the disciplines involved. He's been doing some MMA training of late, but few are taking the idea of him fighting seriously. Plus, people in the company have brought up that that ended a few years back when he was on the losing end of a fight with Booker T, although a street fight and MMA fights are entirely different. But at his age, it's ridiculous, and while some may cite Herschel Walker, Batista couldn't get anywhere near the mainstream press Walker got, and he isn't in the same league of athlete that Walker is. He's been telling friends for more than a year of his interest in leaving to pursue acting. And of course, I think our pal Dave was probably off base a little bit when he said he can't earn this type of money anywhere else. Hollywood has probably earned him as much or more than he has in wrestling, but he does wind up taking a break here for a little bit. Were you surprised that he took a break for a bit?
Well, that final Raw, I asked to speak to Dave because, believe it or not, when he did that promo, and I believe it was with a single spotlight over his head, he was sitting in a wheelchair with his arm in a sling.
Yep.
He had more heat than any heel in the company.
Yep.
And being able to spot that, because I've been around for a minute, I knew it was real heat. And you got to really work in this business, and you got to have TV time. You got to have finishes working to your favor. You got to have a lot of tools to really get over in this business. And Dave, that night was over. And I just anticipating that during the afternoon, I asked him for a few minutes, and we went and sat up in the stands, and I did my very best to talk Dave into staying. I said, Dave, I just told him the truth. I said, you have worked hard to go from a baby face that was as hot as you were to the heel that you are today. You have never been more over, either way, heel or baby face, than you are tonight. Please do not leave. Go ahead and ride this thing out. We need you. It'll be good for you. He looked right at me and he said, Arn, I appreciate that. I think the world of you. And I said, Dave, this is me talking to you. This is not the office or WWE talking to you. This is your friend. Please reconsider. And he said, I want to do some other things. And he wasn't specific on what he did. I'd heard rumblings about, the MMA stuff. When a grown man, says to you, I want to try something, who are any of us to say you shouldn't?
Right.
I mean, not only is he a grown man, he's a guy that has been successful and helped all of us feed our families and put butts in seats, and he's earned that right. And I would suggest now, and after we shook hands and hugged, and I knew I couldn't do anything to sway him. He was going to go. And I think he was just beat up. I think he was travel weary. I think there was a lot of those things that even though he's making a lot of money, I think you get to a point where your body is aching every morning. You don't think about the money so much as you do as getting a rest. And in those days, you didn't ask for, hey, I need a couple of months for my body to heal up. It just, you didn't ask that question, because they would say, yeah, sure, you need to heal up, go ahead. And they'd leave you off 8 months. And that's a lot of money when you're in his spot. So you just didn't ask it. And when he left, obviously the MMA stuff, I know that he enjoyed the training that went with that, and he just enjoyed that being something else. It was like cross training that he was doing, and he would come to the building early and he was doing some different stuff with a trainer, which was kind of cool to watch. And that was why he was still wrestling for WWE. He had started that type training. So, I mean, for a guy like that to be able to just call his own shot, and obviously, who's the last laugh on as far as the acting? This cat, what is it, Galaxian series or whatever it is? The sci-fi series, what's it called?
Guardians of the Galaxy, yeah.
Guardians of the Galaxy has done kick-ass business, and he's pretty much a staple in that. So, in the very end, it all washed out where he was very successful. And I'm glad to see anybody leave this business, because the horror stories, are rampant of guys that leave the business and it doesn't go well for them. And they're a beat up ex-wrestler out in the workforce or trying to get in the workforce. And trust me, there's not that big a demand for us. So I was so happy to see anybody do really well outside of the business. And Dave has, and last time I saw him, he was very happy, and it all worked out.
It did work out. And in case you're curious, he would say in interviews years later that the reason he left here is he, quote, did not like the direction the company was going in, but he would come back. They would announce that he's coming back right before Christmas in 2013. He pops back up in January of 2014, has a bit of a evolution run here, and then is ultimately not thrilled with the idea of working with the company again. He's just burnt out. They asked him to participate in WrestleMania 32 in 2016. He declines the opportunity, but he does pop back up for the 1000th episode of SmackDown. And we know that he went out the way he wanted to with Triple H very recently. But the thing that a lot of people sort of poked fun at actually happened. He did compete in mixed martial arts. That fight happened in October of 2012 and he won. He didn't fight the most decorated fighter ever, but still he got to try his hand at it and won the bout. Do you remember watching his MMA bout? Did you see it? Were a lot of the guys talking about it?
Yeah, the guys were all talking about it. They sure were. I think I saw it. Somebody had it on their phone, I think. Pulled it up and I watched it. Hey, I'm going to be the last guy to critique anybody's abilities when they step in an MMA cage. Brother, that's a tough way to make a living. There's 115-pound girls that would kick my ass. So the fact that he won, that's great. Happy for him. I just know that that's a tough way to make a living.
It is. He did go on to make a bunch of movies. You should look up his IMDb sometime, because he had a couple of things come out in 2011, including Scorpion King 3, in 12, The Man with the Iron Fists, and 13, Riddick. But then Guardians of the Galaxy, man, it gets him to a whole new level. And you would see him participate in Blade Runner 2049. And I think most of our listeners probably are familiar that he's a part of the James Bond franchise, and he's just continued to have great success in Hollywood. It's hard to say that anybody's going to necessarily follow in The Rock's footsteps, considering what all he's done, but Batista proved all the doubters wrong. And this is sort of his swan song in WWE. And he went out in dramatic fashion going through the stage, huh?
Yep. And hey, I'm glad for him. It had a happy ending. Just remember, Dave, if you need a cowboy to get shot off the roof, I'm your man.
I love it. Well, that's going to do it for this week on Arn. Next week, we're doing hashtag Ask Arn Anything. If you've got a question for Arn, it's easy to participate. Just follow us on Twitter. It's at The Arn Show. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of more modern WWE. This time it's Elimination Chamber 2015. This is, an interesting show to say the least. We'll briefly run through what some of the matches were. The last match for the world title is Dean Ambrose and Seth Rollins. We've also got Ryback, Dolph Ziggler, King Barrett, Mark Henry, R-Truth, and Sheamus for the Intercontinental title in Elimination Chamber. We've got Neville and Bo Dallas. We've got Kevin Owens and John Cena. We've got Nikki Bella, Naomi, and Paige in a three-way for the Divas title. The dark match is Stardust and Zack Ryder. And then for the WWE Tag Team titles, it's the New Day taking on the Ascension, the Lucha Dragons, Los Matadores, the Primetime Players, Tyson Kidd, and Cesaro. It feels like an interesting pay-per-view for us to go back and look at. Only 7,000 fans in the building at the American Bank Center in Corpus Christi. And Ryback is on the cover of the pay-per-view poster, and there's just a lot to unpack here. I'm looking forward to next week, breaking this one down.
Me too, buddy.
Well, I misspoke. It's 2 weeks from now, but I am looking forward to next week. Check it out. Ask Arn Anything next week right here on the show. Give us a follow at the Arn Show. And don't forget, Arn was bragging earlier. He got his first t-shirt. Yeah, those are available at arnshirts.com right now. Pick one up at arnshirts.com. And you could have heard this show early and ad free if you would have joined us on adfreeshows.com. We've got a ton of great content up there, including Arn and I breaking down his tag team title win when he and Tully won the tag titles from Lex Luger and Barry Windham. Famously, Barry Windham turned on Lex Luger, joined the Four Horsemen. Dusty had something to say about it and called a beating for his troubles. Watching wrestling with Arn Anderson is fun. Check it out over at adfreeshows.com. And don't forget, later this month, we'll break down when he had his first and only world title shot, also against Barry Windham, Slamboree 1993. It's all happening at adfreeshows.com. He is at the Arn Show. I am at Hey, it's Conrad, and we are out of time. We'll see you next week right here on Arn. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at savewithconrad.com.